I found evidence my husband was cheating with our daughter-in-law. What I did next didn't involve revenge. It involved something far more powerful, reclaiming my life. If you think you know how this ends, keep watching. You don't. I'm sitting at my kitchen table and honestly, I'm laughing. Not because anything's funny, but because if I don't laugh, I might completely lose it. There's a glass of wine in front of me that I haven't touched, and my lawyer's business card is doing this little dance in my fingers. 40 years. 40 years of marriage, and here I am about to blow it all up because of a receipt and a weird email. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with me being some empowered woman who has it all figured out. It starts with me being exactly what I swore I'd never be: oblivious. My husband Julian came home last Tuesday smelling like someone else's perfume. Now, I'm not stupid. I've watched enough drama unfold in this neighborhood to know what that means. But Julian, my Julian, who can barely work his own email, the man who still asks me how to attach a photo to a text message, I actually convinced myself there was some reasonable explanation. Maybe he hugged a client. Maybe he walked through the perfume section at Macy's. Maybe I was being paranoid and reading too much into things because Karen down the street just caught her husband doing exactly this, and now I'm projecting. But then I saw his phone light up with an email while he was snoring away like he didn't have a care in the world, and I'm not proud of this, but I looked. The email said, "You were incredible tonight, Dad," with a little red heart. Dad. Who calls their father-in-law Dad in an email with a heart emoji at 2 a.m? I stood there in my own kitchen, holding my husband's phone like it was evidence in a crime scene, which I guess it was, thinking about every true crime podcast I've ever listened to where the wife says, "I never saw it coming." Well, I was seeing it now, and it was making me nauseous. I started doing what any self-respecting wife in denial would do. I started investigating. I checked his pants pockets while doing laundry, which sounds so cliche, I can't even believe I'm admitting it. Found a receipt from a steakhouse in San Antonio. He'd told me he was in Dallas. San Antonio is where his mother used to live, where he has all these fond memories, where apparently he now takes women who aren't his wife. The receipt showed 2 people, expensive wine, the kind he bought me on our 10th anniversary when he still looked at me like I was something special. I went to the garage. His SUV still had that new car smell mixed with gasoline and something floral and wrong. I opened the glove compartment, and there it was. Personal lubricant. Used. Julian and I haven't been intimate in 3 years. He always said he was tired, that his body just wasn't what it used to be, and I believed him because I'm a good wife who doesn't push. Except now I'm realizing I'm not a good wife. I'm just a foolish one. Here's where the old me would have confronted him right then and there, crying and screaming and making a scene that would accomplish absolutely nothing except making me look unhinged. But I didn't. I took pictures of everything. The email, the receipt, the lubricant tube with its condemning little cap. I put everything back exactly where I found it, and I went to bed next to a man I suddenly didn't recognize. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, the whole domestic goddess routine I've perfected over 4 decades. He barely looked at me when he said he had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I smiled. I said, "Drive safe." I watched him leave, and then I called my friend Margaret, who 3 years ago went through this exact thing with her husband. She gave me a name, Thomas Chen, private investigator. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, hiring a private investigator made me feel like I was in a Lifetime movie. I met Thomas at a coffee shop downtown, this little place where nobody I know goes because the coffee's pretentious and costs $8. He was exactly what you'd expect. Middle-aged, forgettable face, kind eyes that had probably seen too much. I handed him a flash drive with my photos and said, "I think my husband is cheating on me." Thomas didn't judge. He didn't give me that pitying look that makes you feel like the saddest person in the room. He just said, "I'll find out what's happening, Mrs. Roberts, and then you'll know what you're dealing with." That's what I needed. Not revenge, not drama, just the truth. 2 days later, Thomas sent me photos. Julian and Allison, our daughter-in-law, holding hands outside a restaurant. My daughter-in-law, the woman I taught to make my family's flan recipe. The woman who married my son Daniel 5 years ago in a ceremony where I cried happy tears because I thought our family was growing. They looked like a couple. Not like in-laws who barely tolerate each other at Thanksgiving, which is how they'd always acted around me. It was all performance art, and I'd bought front row tickets. More photos came. Them at a hotel, them on a balcony, kissing. Them looking at each other the way Julian used to look at me about 35 years ago, before life got routine and boring and we forgot why we'd fallen in love in the first place. I sat in my bakery, surrounded by the smell of rising dough and vanilla, and I cried. Not pretty crying, ugly, snotty, can't catch my breath crying. My assistant Rosa found me and just held me, didn't ask questions, didn't need to. Thomas called me that evening. He'd recorded audio from their car, completely legal, because it was in a public parking lot. I put in my earbuds and listened to my husband and my daughter-in-law discuss how to steal my bakery business. They were planning to forge documents, use Julian's name on contracts I'd signed, transfer everything into their names. Allison called me that old hag. Julian laughed. He actually laughed. The bakery I'd built from nothing when Julian said I'd never make it work. The business I'd grown from one little storefront to a chain of 5 locations across the city. The dream I'd chased while raising Daniel, while supporting Julian's career, while being the good wife who held everything together. They wanted to take it all and kick me out of my own house. I sat there listening to them plot against me, and something shifted. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was angry. But not angry in that messy, destructive way that makes you do stupid things you regret later. Angry in that cold, clear way that makes you dangerous because you're thinking straight for the first time in years. I called my lawyer the next morning. Rachel Stern, the shark who'd helped Margaret take her cheating husband for everything he was worth. Rachel listened to everything, looked at all the evidence, listened to the audio recordings. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who knows exactly how to destroy someone legally. Juliet, she said, we're going to bury them, but we're going to do it properly. No drama, no public scenes, nothing they can use against you. Just cold, hard, legal consequences. We spent the next week building an airtight case. Rachel discovered that Julian had already started forging transfer documents for the bakery. That's fraud. She found emails between him and a corrupt notary, planning to backdated paperwork. That's conspiracy. The audio recordings of them discussing their plan, completely admissible in court. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings in public spaces, and that parking lot qualified. Rachel also did something brilliant. She hired a forensic accountant who discovered that Julian had been siphoning money from our joint accounts into a secret account for the past 18 months. Not huge amounts that would trigger alerts, just small transfers that added up to almost $75,000. My money, from my bakery, funding his affair with our daughter-in-law. I filed for divorce on a Thursday. Not at home with tears and accusations, but through my lawyer, with a process server who handed Julian the papers at his office in front of his colleagues. The divorce petition included everything. Adultery, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, financial infidelity. It was 37 pages of legal destruction, and it was beautiful. I also filed a restraining order. Julian couldn't come within 500 feet of me or any of my business locations. Rachel made sure of that. The man had been planning to steal my life's work. I wasn't about to give him the chance to manipulate me in person. Then I called Daniel. This was the part I'd been dreading, the conversation that kept me up at night. How do you tell your son that his father is sleeping with his wife? How do you blow up his entire life because yours is already in pieces? I met him at the bakery after hours. He came in looking worried because I'd said it was urgent, and I just handed him my phone with Thomas's photos pulled up. I watched my son's face as he scrolled through image after image of his wife and his father together. He didn't cry. He just went very still, the way he used to when he was a little boy, trying not to show how hurt he was. How long have you known? He asked quietly. 2 weeks. I needed to be sure. I needed evidence. Daniel nodded slowly, still looking at the photos. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for not keeping it a secret to protect me, or whatever. You're my son. You deserve the truth. He looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen before. My boy had grown into a man who could handle hard things. What are you gonna do? Clearly, he asked. I've already filed for divorce. I'm taking everything he tried to steal from me, and I'm making sure he can't hurt us anymore. What are you gonna do? Daniel stood up, set my phone down very carefully on the counter, and said, I'm going to talk to a lawyer too. And then I'm going to make sure Allison regrets every decision that led her to this moment. My son left, and I sat there in my bakery, surrounded by the tools of my trade. the ovens and mixers and cooling racks that represented everything I'd built. I wasn't broken. I was just finished with being treated like I didn't matter. The neighborhood found out, of course. Someone saw the process server at Julian's office. Someone else saw Daniel moving his stuff out of the house he'd shared with Allison. Word spread fast in our community, the kind of gossip that travels faster than any actual news. I got calls, texts, people stopping by the bakery to offer support or ask for details. Margaret came by with wine and Chinese takeout. I heard, she said simply. How are you holding up? I'm okay. I mean, I'm not okay, but I'm going to be okay. Damn right you are. You're Juliet Roberts. You've survived worse than a cheating husband. Have I, though? What's worse than finding out your entire marriage was a lie? Margaret looked at me seriously. Being the kind of person who would do what Julian did. Being the kind of person who would betray family like that. You're not that person, Juliet. That's what makes you better than them. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Julian tried to claim that the bakery was joint property because we'd been married when I built it. Rachel destroyed that argument with documentation showing that I'd used my own inheritance from my parents as seed money, that Julian's name appeared nowhere on any business documents, that he'd contributed exactly 0 hours of labor to building the business. He'd never even worked the counter on busy days. Julian's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as a woman scorned who was overreacting. Rachel presented the forged documents, the secret bank account, and the audio recordings of him planning to steal my business. She presented hotel receipts going back almost 2 years. This wasn't a brief affair or a one-time mistake. This was systematic betrayal with clear criminal intent. The judge, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every variation of human awfulness, listened to everything with an increasingly cold expression. When Julian's lawyer finished arguing that Julian deserved half of everything, she actually laughed. Not a friendly laugh either. Counselor, she said, your client committed adultery with his daughter-in-law, attempted to defraud his wife of her business, and embezzled marital funds. I'm not sure what part of that entitles him to anything except criminal charges. Julian was ordered to return every penny he'd taken, plus interest. He was ordered to pay my legal fees, which by that point were substantial. He got nothing from the divorce. Not the house, not the business, not even the car he'd been driving because it was registered in my name. The judge also referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges. Allison and Daniel's divorce was equally ugly. Daniel's lawyer used the same evidence, the same recordings. Allison tried to claim that Julian had manipulated her, that she was the victim of a predatory older man, but the recordings told a different story. They showed a woman who was fully complicit, who'd actively planned to steal from her mother-in-law, who'd referred to me as that old hag with genuine contempt. Daniel got everything in his divorce, too. Allison moved back to her parents' house in Waco with nothing but her personal belongings and a reputation that would follow her forever. But here's the thing nobody tells you about winning. It doesn't feel like winning. You get justice, you get vindication, you get to keep everything you built, but you're still alone at the end of it. You still lost 40 years to someone who didn't value them. You still have to rebuild a life you thought was already built. The first few months after the divorce was finalized were strange. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for someone who wasn't there, and then I'd remember why, and I'd feel relieved and sad at the same time. The house was too quiet. Daniel moved back in with me for a while, and that helped, but he had his own healing to do. We started going to therapy, separately and together. My therapist, Dr. Patricia Wong, didn't let me get away with anything. When I tried to blame myself for not seeing the signs earlier, she shut that down immediately. Juliet, you trusted your husband because that's what you're supposed to do in a marriage. That's not a weakness. That's not naivety. That's you being a normal human being in what you believed was a normal relationship. Julian and Allison are responsible for their choices. Not you. But the hardest part was accepting that I'd wasted so much time. 40 years of being faithful, of supporting his career, of building a life together, and it meant nothing to him. Doctor. Wong had thoughts on that too. You didn't waste anything. You built an incredible business. You raised a good man. You learned skills and developed strength that you're going to carry forward. Julian wasted 40 years of being married to someone valuable. That's his loss, not yours. I started doing things I'd never had time for before. I joined a book club at the library. I took a watercolor painting class at the community center, even though I'm terrible at it and my paintings look like something a 5-year-old would make. I traveled to San Diego for the first time in 20 years and stood on the beach where I grew up, remembering the girl I used to be before I became someone's wife. The bakery kept growing. Without Julian's negativity and constant criticism disguised as concern, I felt free to take risks. I opened a sixth location. I hired a young pastry chef named Marcus who brought fresh ideas and actually listened when I talked about my vision. I started teaching baking classes on weekends for people who wanted to learn the craft. People would come into the bakery and ask how I was doing, and I learned to say, I'm really good, actually, without it being a lie. Because I was good. Better than good. I was free. And Daniel eventually moved out, got his own apartment closer to the fire station where he works. He started dating again, carefully this time, and I watched him slowly trust people again. We have dinner every Sunday, just the two of us, and we talk about everything. Real conversations, not the surface level stuff we used to talk about when Allison and Julian were around. Mom? He said one Sunday over my homemade enchiladas, I'm proud of you, the way you handled everything. You could have lost it, gone completely off the rails, and nobody would have blamed you. But you stayed in control. You took care of yourself legally and emotionally. You showed me what strength actually looks like. I cried when he said that, the good kind of crying this time, because that's what I needed to hear. Not that I'd gotten revenge, not that I'd destroyed Julian, but that I'd protected myself and maintained my dignity. Julian tried to contact me about 6 months after everything was finalized. He sent a letter to the bakery because he couldn't come near me in person thanks to the restraining order. Rosa brought it to me in my office, looking at it like it might explode. The letter was long, full of apologies and excuses. He said he'd made a mistake, that he'd been confused, that Allison had seduced him and he'd been weak. He said he still loved me, that we could work through this, that 40 years of marriage meant something. He said he was in therapy, working on himself, becoming a better man. I read it once. Then I fed it through the paper shredder in my office and went back to reviewing inventory orders. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. You don't accidentally have a 2-year affair with your daughter-in-law. You don't accidentally forge documents to steal your wife's business. Those are choices made repeatedly with full knowledge of the consequences. Rachel called me a few weeks later to let me know that the DA had decided to prosecute Julian for fraud. He'd ended up pleading guilty to a reduced charge and got probation, community service, and a felony on his record. He'd also been disbarred, lost his law license. His career was over. How do you feel about that? Rachel asked. I feel nothing. I said honestly, that's his consequence for his choices. I didn't cause it. I just documented what he did. A year after the divorce, Margaret threw me a party. They called it a freedom celebration, which made me laugh because it was so dramatic. But she invited all our friends, set up a karaoke machine in her backyard, and made me sing I Will Survive, which is possibly the most cliched song choice ever, but it felt right. I stood there in Margaret's backyard with a microphone in one hand and a margarita in the other, surrounded by people who actually cared about me, singing off-key and not caring, and I realized something. I wasn't just surviving. I was actually living, maybe for the first time in decades. I started dating eventually, though calling it dating feels weird at 62. Coffee with a retired English teacher named Robert, who makes me laugh. Dinner with a widower named Frank, who owns a hardware store and has kind hands. Nothing serious, nothing that feels like I'm trying to replace Julian or recreate what I had. Just enjoying company, having conversations, remembering what it feels like to be seen as someone interesting and valuable. Robert asked me once why I wasn't bitter. We were having coffee at that pretentious downtown place where I'd first met Thomas, and he just told me about his own divorce 20 years ago. I was angry for years, he admitted. Couldn't let it go. And it just poisoned everything else in my life. But you seem at peace with it all. How did you do that? I thought about it for a while before answering. I think I got angry at the right people for the right reasons, and then I did something about it. I didn't just stew in it, I took action. Legal, appropriate action that protected me and my son. And once that was done, once I'd taken back everything that was mine, there was nothing left to be angry about. Julian and Allison are living their consequences. That has nothing to do with me anymore. That's remarkably healthy, Robert said, looking impressed. I have a good therapist, I replied, laughing. Daniel got engaged recently to a woman named Sophie who works as a physical therapist. She's smart, funny, calls him on his nonsense, and actually seems to love him for who he is. When he brought her to meet me, I was nervous. What if I'd lost the ability to trust my judgment about people? What if Sophie was secretly terrible and I just couldn't see it? But Sophie was wonderful. She helped me in the bakery without being asked intelligent questions about the business, and told Daniel to stop hovering because I clearly didn't need protecting. At the end of the evening, she hugged me and said thank you for raising someone like Daniel. And thank you for showing him what it looks like to stand up for yourself. They're getting married next spring. I'm making the wedding cake, all 5 tiers of it. Daniel asked if I was okay with that, if it would bring up bad memories of his first wedding. I told him that Allison and Julian don't get to ruin weddings for me. They don't get to ruin anything for me anymore. I see Julian sometimes, from a distance. The restraining order expired, but we don't have any reason to be in the same places. Once I saw him at the grocery store, looking older and tired, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just nothing. He was a stranger who used to live in my house. Allison moved away, I heard. Somewhere out of state, trying to start over where people don't know her story. I hope she finds whatever she's looking for, and I genuinely mean that. Not because I've forgiven her, but because holding on to anger about her would give her more space in my life than she deserves. The bakery is doing better than ever. We just signed a contract with a major hotel chain to supply their breakfast pastries at all their Texas locations. Marcus and I developed a new line of gluten-free options that are actually good, not just edible. We're training apprentices, passing on the craft to the next generation. I bought myself a new house. Smaller than the one I shared with Julian, but entirely mine. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, with bright colors and weird art and zero compromise. I have a reading nook by a window where I drink tea every morning and watch the sunrise. I have a garden where I'm learning to grow herbs, though I keep killing the basil. My life isn't perfect. I still have lonely days. I still sometimes wonder what I missed, what signs I should have seen earlier. I still occasionally have dreams where Julian and I are young again and everything's okay, and I wake up feeling sad, but those moments are fewer and farther between now. Dr. Wong asked me in our last session what I'd learned from everything. I thought about it for a while. I learned that trust isn't the same as blindness. I learned that protecting yourself isn't the same as being vindictive. I learned that you can be strong and still hurt, and that's okay. I learned that the justice system actually works sometimes if you document everything and have a good lawyer. And I learned that I'm a lot tougher than I thought I was. What would you tell someone going through something similar? All she asked? I'd tell them to get evidence. Don't confront, don't make accusations you can't prove, just quietly gather information. Get a good lawyer before doing anything. Anything else, protect your assets, and then trust the system to work. It's not as satisfying as dramatic revenge, but you get to keep your dignity, and that matters more than people think. I'd also tell them that it gets better. Not quickly, not easily, but it does get better. The day comes when you realize you haven't thought about your ex in 3 days, then a week. Then you can't remember the last time you wondered what they're doing. The day comes when someone asks about your divorce and you can talk about it the way you talk about an old injury that healed, something that happened but doesn't define you anymore. I'm 62 years old. I own a successful business. I have a son who loves me and is building a good life. I have friends, hobbies, plans for the future. I have Sunday dinners and book club meetings and painting classes where I create terrible art that makes me happy. Julian and Allison tried to take my life away. Instead, they gave me the push I needed to build an even better one. Not because of some elaborate revenge plot, not because I destroyed them, but because I stood up for myself using every legal tool available and then moved on. That's my story. Not a revenge story, not a cautionary tale about trust, but a story about reclaiming your life when someone tries to steal it. About choosing the high road, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to fight properly. And if you're going through something similar right now, if you're sitting in your kitchen looking at evidence of betrayal and wondering what to do, here's what I want you to know. You're going to survive this. You're going to come out the other side. You're going to build something new that's actually better than what you lost because it'll be built on truth instead of lies. Get a lawyer. Document everything. Protect yourself. And then let the system do its job while you start the hard work of healing. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And I'm doing more than fine. Thanks for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from and if this helped you in any way. Drop a comment, hit subscribe if you want more stories about real life and real healing. And And remember, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so good that you forget why you were angry in the first place. See you in the next one.